Our next presenter is Mr. Dan Ross, someone that really needs no introduction among our group here. But the presentation, Dan's presentation is about 3DEP and all that data. And it's one of these things that we have all this data, and maybe we're beyond the point of what do we do with it, because we know what we want to do with it. But sometimes we've got so much that the question then becomes, how do we share it? How do we get that out to people who can use it? Because maybe a lot of times the natural tendency is to, I've got my can of data over here, and you've got your can of data over there, and you've got your can of data over there, but maybe the same data is in all three cans. So Dan's going to talk to us just a little bit about some innovative approaches on taking care of that. So, Dan.
Thanks, Jonathan. Hopefully everybody can hear me. As Jonathan said, I'm actually going to build off of some of the previous conversations this morning, because this fits well with that topic. And this particular topic has some of the same challenges that does. The difference here is we're kind of at a pivotal turning point, because technology is changing rapidly in this space, and I think it offers us some new opportunities. That's right. I can do myself, can I? How about that? So we're going to look at the 3DEP challenge and where we are today. And what I mean by that is I think you're all aware that the technology that we have for 3DEP now is quite different than what we had many years ago. At least in my home state, our previous collect for LiDAR was less than 1 point per meter. Today, we're collecting the entire state at 30 points per meter or better in some areas. It provides us a huge opportunity, but at the same time, it dramatically increases the amount of storage that we need to do that. Not only the data is better, but it's improved quality. So it gives us a whole new view of the landscape and the Earth's surface and all of those things on it. So it's going to give us a new sense of space that we didn't have before, because the data based on that new density is that much better. High density, of course, also will require the need for increased storage. I don't know about your states. The vendors probably have, or our sponsors have, a very good idea of what this is. But for Minnesota, we're projecting that it's going to be at least 500 terabytes of data when we're all done with our QL1. And that's the kind of system that we now have to prepare for, in terms of how are we going to store that data, how are we going to manage that data, and how are we going to disseminate that data. Now, I'm not going to talk much about education in this particular presentation, but I will end with that, because I think that's one of the areas that NSGIC can really help, and where we can all come together and create a common set of education tools across the board based on LiDAR data that could be shared more effectively. So imagine that we're getting this new technology, this new LiDAR. Well, that means we have to create all new products. And the opportunity with the internet to influence that is really great. So from there, we're getting new tools that we can create new products from. So every time you shift in that data quality, it's almost like starting over. The high density data, of course, while providing better quality, also brings that same need to have new ways to view that data, new ways to analyze that data, to create those derived products, and new ways, if you're following the patterns, of streaming that information on the internet. That's going to be a big change for us. I don't know about the rest of US states. You heard me say this morning that I think our goal, at least in Minnesota, is to have this all done on the internet. Traditional systems have really been in-house. So when the 3DEP team came together, that's probably my next slide, this is what we discovered. So we discovered that the data is stored multiple different ways, but it's stored differently by each state. Now, obviously, USGS has a national repository, but in some cases, the states are getting the data before it's posted there, and sometimes they're getting it after. So we're in this scenario where we have multiple storage mechanisms and multiple places that it's stored. I think most of the states are still in the old world where they're having it on premise, but many are starting to look at the cloud. And some are looking at the cloud in terms of having a sponsor or a commercial sector partner host that for you. And some are using the cloud, but within their own space in their own organization, or any combination of the above. Data management is done much the same way. You can see that many folks are involved in the data management. I already mentioned the national repository. Some of those are in state agencies. Some are stored in a GIS state center or a library or a university or any combination of the above. So we really have a variety, but what I'm trying to get to here is that I think right now there's an opportunity to start to change that, where we can come together. Data dissemination, again, everybody has their own tools. So when we look across the landscape, whether it was a commercial sector that hosted it or whether it was the states themselves that were hosting it, we have many repositories. We have many different methods. We have many different storage mechanisms, and technology is changing rapidly. So that leads us to the opportunity. But not only the opportunity to come together as partners, much like you heard in the presentations this morning, but also the opportunity to come together around technology and standards and other things. Think about the opportunity to have a common storage repository or a national repository that includes derived products. Right now, we're all creating our derived products individually for our states, but we all know that elevation and rivers and contours and all that stuff crosses borders. And all those other important things that Nadine talked about this morning called disasters do the same. So we really need a national model where the data itself can be federated, and we as states or others can add to that repository our derived products and follow the NSGIC model. Think about the landslide potential. That happens all over. That doesn't just happen in your state. Think about impermeable surfaces, like go all the way across the nation. So really what we want to do is look at what we can do to reduce the redundancy, reduce the time it takes folks to find and access the data, much as you heard in that last presentation. We need to decide, and we're the ones that can make the decision about, is it 50 or is it a few? Right now it's 50. Let's talk about how the innovation space can help us. I think you're all learning that there's optimized opportunities for storage now. That the marketplace, and not only the marketplace, but federal agencies, state agencies, and others are looking at, do we need to pursue new data formats? And you heard again in the previous presentation, well, in order to do that, we have to have common standards. But those are emerging. Think about things like cloud optimized point clouds, or the new streaming formats that are coming out so that we can actually leverage the internet, called SLPK, stream layer packaging, for streaming those large data sets. So they don't have to be inside your house anymore or on a local server to do all that. The internet is changing much of that for us. Think about it's not just LiDAR anymore. I don't know about in your states, but in my states, they don't want just LiDAR. They want all the aerial imagery. They want all the boundary information. They want all that stuff too. So it's not just a LiDAR repository anymore. It's got to have a viewer that has all that other stuff that they may want to use to analyze that data across the board, or that might affect what's happening in the space that they're looking at. We want to leverage the Internet of Things. We want to innovate using the web. You heard me say that I think in Minnesota, our goal is to not have to build in-house tools anymore. Rather, can we leverage the Internet of Things? And our sponsors in the commercial space are building new tools to support that. Everything from new analytics to, the point cloud was always 2D because it was pretty much clip, zip, and ship. Well, now you can view the point cloud online. How many of US states are leveraging that? Is anybody in the States leveraging the new technology that's out there via the web? I think there's a couple. Okay. So that kind of sets the ground space for where we are. It feels to me like we're at a pivotal moment where we can start to leverage technology. This isn't a technology problem. This is a problem of each of us doing our own thing, which is not the NSGIC mantra. It's not just clip, zip, and ship, you heard me say, but everything is 3D now. You're going to see that in the next slide. And there's new capabilities out there in terms of federation. We've had lots of discussions in our state about there's multiple contributors, but we only want one repository or one catalog where they can discover that data. Can we have a federated approach? And of course, the technology supports that. 3D is becoming the big thing, but not 3D on your desktop anymore. It's 3D through the viewer from the internet. Everything's becoming 3D. We all know that there's several packages out there on your desktop that can do that for you, but really where it's going is on the internet. Multiple vendors provide the capability and tools to build the Earth's surface in 3D and present that to you on the web. So again, looking at the Internet of Things. Through the internet, much of the basic analytics can be done online, from slope analysis to profiles to point cloud viewing. And now it's not just clip, zip, and ship by tile. You can pull up a portion of a point cloud, view that in 3D, download the data behind that area of interest, and it's a much smaller data set. The other thing that these new tools are doing is, because they're on the fly kinds of approaches, they're meeting some of the needs of the users and negating the need for as much download. That's how we can leverage the Internet of Things. In order to do that, however, it requires that we have common requirements for delivery of both the data and new capabilities for analytics. I'm not aware that that's happening as much right now, but the Internet of Things is going to push us that direction. You heard me talk about those data formats are starting to emerge. And the ability to stream those things on the internet, we have to deal with those. So this is the space where we turn it to discussion, a little bit anyway, and then I'm going to give you some next steps. So this is how we're looking at it right now. This is the opportunity as I see it. How can we integrate in the middle there to leverage technology with some governance and resources to form partnerships where we can do this a few times or once and not 50 times like we are now. New technology related to storage, tools, and analytics that are providing or emerging now provides us an opportune time to invest our efforts in my opinion. They can allow us to move away from how we've been doing things in the past and provide a richer experience for our users. So rather than build it 50, let's build it a few. Additionally, they allow us to move towards shared solutions, of course, and that's one of the things we seek. Imagine if we had a multi-state or even a national solution rather than the individual solutions that many of us have now. Imagine the impact that would have on resources. Sai yesterday talked about waste in government and how do we do this and how do we leverage some of that waste to fill in the gaps. Shared solutions would require a governance approach that doesn't exist today, but through partnership can be gained. And not only gained, but it would give us the tools to maintain and even enhance the shared solution going forward when we have standards to build from. It feels to me like the opportunity is right for partnerships to come together around innovative approaches that require thinking out of the box, but can come up with common solutions that can be leveraged more effectively by all of us. You heard me say earlier, we haven't focused much on education, but that's something I will wrap up with, because I want to know how many states would be willing to pursue a common education approach instead of each of us building it every time. What are your thoughts on where we can come together in these areas to leverage innovation, build standards or common approaches in the governance part? Where are the partnerships? So I hope those of you folks online are thinking about this, and you can drop them in the chat, and we'll get to some discussion points here in a minute. But for me, I think the time is right. I don't want to go spend another $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 to build a solution that doesn't cross borders. Some thoughts on next step, and I hope that you'll share yours. It seems like the time is ripe to explore and pursue the opportunity for shared solutions. That shared approach, or that opportunity approach, if you will, certainly needs to include how we can leverage public-private partnerships. You heard that through the OGC discussion this morning. I think that the ability of this group to talk and come together in collaboration to do this is possible. To do that, of course, you've heard me mention several times in this presentation that we need to pursue some common governance in order to make that happen. And most importantly, we have to do it together. So with that, I'm going to open it up. Let's keep the conversation going. How can we move to a different space? The challenge here is this isn't just LiDAR. We have many themes like this, but LiDAR is pushing this because of the new data that's coming out, because of the Internet of Things, and we need new ways to analyze those large data sets that are out there. So we're switching out of this theme by theme to really big data that perhaps we can leverage together. With that, I'll open it up for questions.
Thanks, Dan. Richard from Texas. It's from my standpoint, we're in complete agreement with what you're discussing as far as 3D being a capable product. The problem I think that we're experiencing right now is that there doesn't seem to be a real move on standards as it relates to being able to do this. I know we can view in a viewer, we can view three-dimensional elements, but I've been kind of waiting for Esri or some other one to create a standard by which you can serve three-dimensional data into a viewer and actually use it for base level engineering modeling on the fly sort of stuff. And we don't seem to be there yet. And everybody seems to have pocketed solutions, but nothing that's kind of standardized. You don't want to marry into one and just only to have another standard appear somewhere else and you've got to move everything. So we're kind of in a wait and see mode. But I think we've been waiting and seeing for a long time. And I don't know if anybody can share their experiences and maybe where we are timing wise. So do you have any insight into that?
Well, everybody who knows me, I'm not really one to wait. So I think we have to bring the conversation to each other. And that includes our sponsors, that includes folks like OGC, we have to leverage some of those partnerships. It includes organizations like Amazon and Google and Microsoft who own the cloud portion of this, because it has to be part of that discussion. The reason I brought this up is because it's time for us to have that conversation, Richard, together, instead of our private or our sponsor sector talking about what they're doing on their own, and us and our states getting data and having to deal with this and then going and building our own. This is an effort to bring everybody together to try to see where we can take the conversation. But thank you for bringing that up.
Dan, this is Chris from Wisconsin. Really good presentation. And it just kind of dawned on me as you were presenting that this issue is not really new in the sense of what NSGIC is about. We've talked about a national spatial data infrastructure for years. That this is essentially that component of it and getting in that direction. So that was just one observation. Technical piece, one of the things that, you know, we're going to struggle here in Wisconsin, we publish our parcels, but we don't edge match any of those parcels. We just publish them as they are. That's going to be a discussion point. Do we do, you know, this is to Wade's point, not just attribute standards, but geospatial standards? Do we create a national framework for edge matching and snapping? And how do we make a seamless map so that the users who are grabbing and using that data can trust that data? I think that's an important component, but yeah, it's a big lift. We all have to get together. And I like the idea that NSGIC is the one who is going to press this issue forward. But we have to have everyone at the table to have that discussion. This isn't going to be solved in 6 months. This is something that is probably going to take a little bit of time, but if we're willing to get dirty on this and work on it, I think we can be successful in the space.
I think we chose this topic, Chris, because we have to start somewhere. We've been waiting for this to happen on its own, like Richard said, but it's not going to happen on its own. We have the opportunity. When I look at it from the state perspective, Minnesota just put a whole bunch of effort into developing requirements for what that Internet of Things needs to look like. We're not the only one that needs that. That could be shared and we could come together as a community. Those requirements can in turn be given to our commercial partners because they're ahead of us in building some of these tools. They're the ones here to help us provide those solutions. What are you pointing at?
Yeah.
Oh,
So
I don't see.
I'm going to
the
go
chat.
to Neil McGaffey here in the room next, and Jamie, after Neil, will pick up some of the comments and questions from the virtual folks.
Sounds great.
So Neil from Massachusetts, just picking up on both what Richard and Chris had to say. This data set, more probably than any other of the NSGI layers, is complicated as far as the stakeholders and what tools they use. So I sold elevation mapping heavily on the basis of its value for hydrologic modeling. That's a whole different software toolkit. And we're not talking to those people as far as I know.
Well, you think about things like hydromodification. You think about things like forestry biomass. People are doing this stuff, and where's it stand? Right in that little box where it's in. This gives us an opportunity to cross state lines, to cross national lines, and have these conversations together and do it once instead of many times. I'd love to hook up the forestry people in Minnesota with the forestry people in other states and rather have each do their own thing, build it together and put it in the national repository. The chat, we were going to go to the chat.
Yes, thank you, Dan. I have Matt Zamolzik from US Census who would like to come off mute and share, please.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
We can, Matt.
I just wanted to extend on Dan's conversation that standards development and implementation is the key to realizing the vision that Dan was articulating. And since not all stakeholders have the same needs or capabilities, perhaps a tiered approach to standards could be tried and implemented, such as minimum standards, best practice standards, and optimal standards, for example.
Yeah, just a short response to that, Matt. I think, like I said before, we have to start somewhere and understand the requirements first and build the standards from those in order to share that. But totally agree that that has to be a huge component of the governance. It's going to have to be a little bit more than just standards, but certainly standards make that sharing possible.
Dan, we also have a comment from Mark Holmes. Mark, feel free to come off mute.
All right, yeah, I just put a couple comments in there in the chat, but so one of the things I mentioned, I agree with Chris, we have the same scenario with parcels. So I think with, any states that maybe have approached something like that, that's where we get into some of the lessons learned or maybe things that are working in other states that could be a starting point for standards. Also, we've got a data dissemination tool that we've been using, but just curious, I guess, Dan or anybody else in the audience, we've been looking at like tying into a position description, more of a specialist around LiDAR, or kind of building our staff to have somebody with more LiDAR experience. Is anybody looking at that? And we'd be interested in sharing thoughts on that in the future.
I don't know if I caught all of that, Mark, but I know
Okay.
at least in our home state, we're leveraging the folks that have the LiDAR experience to help specifically in the area of drive products. Because we're getting the base from USGS, but there's so many more things that we need to develop for that. I'm not sure if it's like your state, but there are so many sectors that want to use LiDAR data. The lift for derived products could be endless, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that's what we're finding too. I mean, there's a lot of information coming in of different ideas, and that's where we're looking at. We need someone with a little bit more expertise to try to weed through that and pull it together and figure out what the right tools are. So we're just kind of in that whole, I guess, onslaught of thoughts and ideas and figuring out where to start.
I think that's perfect, Mark. That's why we want to have the conversation, because there's a lot of us that are struggling with this concept about where do we start. This is big data now. We're changing gears here with this stuff that's coming now.
And Dan, Karen Rogers has her hand up. Karen, feel free to come off mute and show your beautiful face.
Jamie, and thanks, Dan. This is a great topic that certainly warrants a good discussion and future work on our part. I would agree that I'm in the same boat. Wyoming is in the same boat as Chris and Mark, as far as, we just smush all of our parcel data together without any QA/QC. So our parcels certainly do not match up across county boundaries, which is awesome. But my comment, and this is something I said last week at MAPS, is I think it's very exciting to think about how we can innovate on this and provide online solutions that really puts these data in the hands of our constituents, because the exciting thing is, we're never going to, or it would be hard to have them understand our technology, but through providing them with tools like this, they will sure as hell appreciate the data and what we do. And I think that's, a very strong case for support for GIS programs and public funding to support the data and the tools. So that's all I had to say. Thanks.
And of course, that's the goal here, Karen, right? Is to provide our users a much richer experience. And collectively, we can understand what that means because we have the broad community to share that.
I don't know if NSGIC's ever thought about a GitHub for shared tools or some sort of space to share the tools that other states have already kind of gone through and created. I know every state does things differently due to funding mechanisms and support. We serve out our LiDAR via Teams and OneDrive. So we have unlimited space and it works well. And then we also have conflation tools to make sure our parcels align. And so perhaps that's one thing that we could do to share the tools between states.
Thanks for that, Aaron. I think that just points to having the conversation to at least understand what everybody's doing so that we can build some shared requirements from there. How are we doing on time? Okay.
And Jamie, I think Linda had her hand up in Zoom.
That's correct, Linda. Feel free to come off mute.
Thank you all, and thank you, Dan. Aaron, I like that idea. I'm wondering though, we have developed a 3DEP info hub, and Phil's done a great deal of work trying to collect, harvest, and make available tools and ideas like that. So I'd like to maybe explore that in our next state team meeting about how we can use that existing info hub maybe to facilitate this access to these shared resources.
Yeah, thanks for that plug, Linda. That's really where we need to probably end up here is the 3DEP team is, wanting to hear from you on this. This is the stuff that's going to inform our next conversations, if you will, and where to take this from here. So if you're interested in being part of that state team or becoming a member in those groups, please raise your hand and do that. We need your help.
Yeah, and this is Phil. The concept of, say, adding a GitHub site or resource to that is very doable, as well as pointing to existing GitHub sites that might already exist.
I'll wrap this up. There was a couple things that I pulled out of the DP21 lessons that I think are relevant here. Data sharing and cloud computing are too difficult. I feel like in this space, we're already starting to innovate. I agree they are too difficult, but we're starting to innovate already in this space. So I think it's something we can continue to move forward. The challenge of making resources findable and accessible applies to data, but also to cloud resources and really any type of capacity. This is just, LiDAR is just another one of those, as you mentioned, Chris. The goal here is to move away from the 50 and to the few and see what we can do with one instead of trying to capture the whole mountain at one time. I'll leave it at that.
Dan, something that occurred to me through this conversation is a reasonable target might be if we take our standards and our kind of model practices far enough so that we can have standard procurement language. So federal agencies, state agencies, locals could use common language, and that language doesn't surprise any of our sponsor communities. Right. And they go, oh yeah, we can do that. Yeah, because they've been part of it. By the time we do something novel in an RFP, it often would be a surprise because we've had to keep those terms secretive to not disadvantage any. So if we have a separation between all the pieces we need so that we can then have common language afterward, I think that's going to be a lot of what will drive kind of adherence.
Anytime states can leverage common procurement language really helps. I think if we could leverage common requirements for the Internet of Things or the direction that we want to go, I think that's going to help our sponsor community as well, so that they're not all doing different things. Thanks, everyone.